Hi, I'm Hamel Husain. I work at GitHub. I'm a machine learning engineer there. Um, I'll be live streaming today. Um, with me is Alexander Matheson. Xander Matheson, I'll let you introduce yourself, Xander.
Hey, I'm Xander. I'm a data scientist at GitHub, and I'm just going to help Hamel out with some of the comments and questions, and prevent him from going off the rails a little bit. Hopefully,
That's great. Okay, so let me just introduce you. Let me just introduce myself a little bit more, just give you a background who I am. This is my webpage in case you want to learn more about some stuff I'm working on. Like I said, I work at GitHub. One of the things I work on at GitHub is building tools for data scientists that might help them with their workflows, particularly in their GitHub workflows. And so I want to go through some examples today of that, and then also do some live coding, which I've never done before. So we're going to see how that goes. So first, I want to motivate an example of what I'm talking about by GitHub workflows involving data scientists. So this PR, which is public, you can take a look at it. This is actually what motivated me, or what pushed me over the edge in kind of was the last straw where I decided that I needed to do something to help data scientists that are using GitHub. So this is a PR. Basically, what this PR does, it changes some notebooks and it changes some code. But really, the meat of the PR is we're changing a model, changing some hyperparameters that are associated with the model. So changing the size of number of hidden layers, using different optimizers. And then the question comes up, like, do these new parameters yield better models? And the response is, yeah, I think so. The old parameters are pretty bad and multiple things that I tested on. And then this PR is merged. So this is really interesting. For a traditional software engineering workflow, you would never do this. Like, we would never change code and then say, hey, does this code break anything, or is this code better? And just kind of like guess. But that's what these data scientists are doing here, because they don't really have any tools that really fit the paradigm of machine learning. Yeah, they have unit tests and things like that, but nothing that really fits the mold of machine learning. This person needs a way to test the model and kind of display the results in the PR. So if you were to go back to this PR, you don't really know for sure whether this model improved things or not. I mean, you just have to like run on your, go off your memory or take somebody's word for it. And that's not the way we want to do software engineering. That's very brittle and likely to break. So I'm going to kind of motivate this sort of ML, what I'm calling ML ops, which is kind of this DevOps tools for data scientists. I'm going to jump right into a demo of way that GitHub Actions can address this problem in this PR. So for this particular segment of this live streaming, I'm going to show you a recording just because it's so involved in it. Actually, it takes a really long time to show you the end-to-end workflow. And so I want to make it easier to follow. So I recorded it so that you can, so that I can explain all the things. But then at the end, I will do some live coding. So don't worry, I will do live coding, and you will have a chance to see me do that. So this is a PR, and in this PR, I'm changing the size of embedding of my model, and I'm opening a PR that is dealing with that. You can click on it and see that's what I'm doing. I'm basically changing some hyperparameters, and the idea is, I don't want the reviewer to guess whether this model is better or not. So one thing I want to mention is, unlike traditional CI/CD, running a model may take a really long time. And so you might not want to do a full model run on each push to a PR. That might consume a lot of resources. Also, like, you might want to run these models on the infrastructure of your choice. Maybe using GPUs, maybe you want to connect it to your data center. The CI is going to look, in this case, a lot different. So in this case, what I'm demonstrating is I'm going to trigger this model to run and be tested by a ChatOps command. And what I'm showing here is I'm going to have this special command, run full test, slash run full test. And I'll explain how this all works. So I'm going to issue this ChatOps command just by making a command in the PR. And what this is going to do is it's going to trigger GitHub Actions to start to instantiate my machine learning workflow on the infrastructure of my choice. So what you see here is I'm building Docker containers that contain the code in this PR. And what that does is it's materializing the changes that I made in this pull request. It's building the appropriate Docker containers associated with that contain that code in that environment. And it's pushing it to my internal Docker registry. For this demo, I'm using Docker Hub, but it can be any Docker registry. And then I instantiate a machine learning workflow on my private infrastructure. So what I'm showing here is you see a comment that's been dropped on this PR with a bunch of metadata. See, ML workflow for this SHA has been instantiated. These Docker images have been built. So this particular, these comments are associated with something called Argo, which is a cloud-native machine learning workflow system. This is Argo. This is the Argo UI. The Argo UI allows you to define arbitrary workflows and DAGs. And it's really good for machine learning. It's really popular. Kubeflow is built on top of this. And so you see that this Argo workflow has opened a check run. So this check run is this yellow thing, this yellow dot that's open. And that lets you know this pipeline is actually running. And what we want is when that is complete, we want it to pass. So we go back to the Argo UI, see the model is running. Eventually, the model will train and it'll reach success or failure, in this case, success. And we can click on these, we can see the logs. This is the Argo UI, but it could be any arbitrary machine learning system. So eventually, it's a success and you see the check run passes. But more importantly, now you see additional metadata being dropped into the PR. So in this case, we see some model evaluation results that help us measure the efficacy of this model against a baseline. And so how this works is we log the metrics of our model to a experiment tracking system. In this case, we're using weights and biases. And so I'll open one of those. So I'm going to click on that run ID, and this is weights and biases. So weights and biases, again, is an experiment tracking tool. This is the weights and biases UI. You can click on a model run of your choice. You can see the metrics. So these are some training metrics. These are some system metrics. This is everything emitted to standard out. These are model artifacts. This allows you to see everything in one place. And so in this case, we're using a GitHub action to pull the experiment tracking system, and bring back the statistics and render it in a PR as a markdown table. And then also give us this metadata and drop links where appropriate. And we can check that the model run is associated with the correct SHA if we want, with the latest SHA that we pushed. And so this is really interesting. The reason I'm using Argo and weights and biases, that's very arbitrary. The point to drive home is you can string together heterogeneous components according to whatever tools you are using, and you can bring that into your pull request or your GitHub workflow in different ways. You don't have to use weights and biases. You don't have to use Argo. You can use whatever you want because you can run arbitrary things inside actions. And so the next step here is you might want to say, you might have this process of reviewing a PR, and you might want to decide, like, I want to deploy one of these models. you might decide that this candidate model is better better than the baseline model, and you might want to deploy it. And so a lot of people use GitHub deployments, or deploying from GitHub. You can also do something similar for machine learning. And so this is an example where I'm going to again use ChatOps, and I'm going to reference the run ID. And what it's going to do is it's going to trigger GitHub Actions to again pull that experiment tracking system for that run ID, and it's going to pull the model artifact. Once it pulls the model artifact, it will then deploy it. So in this case, I'm deploying it to Google Cloud Functions, which is like, it's very similar to AWS Lambda on Google Cloud. And the reason I'm doing this, I'm really trying to drive home that you can have heterogeneous things. You don't need to use any monolithic infrastructure. You can use whatever you want. So in this case, we deploy to Google Cloud. You can see here, this is the Google Cloud Functions dashboard. And the cool part is you get the annotations here in the pull request, where you can see that this branch was deployed, and then you get a link to the deployment. And the link can be whatever you want to put in there. And then I'll keep playing this. So, okay, so that hopefully helps motivate you. That's a very end-to-end example. It's very full-featured. And you might be wondering, like, okay, this looks really cool. Like, how do I do that? That seems really, how can I enable this myself on GitHub? And so, so what I'll do is I'm going to give you some pointers, but then I'll end with a live coding example of how to do something really simple, like comment on a PR automatically in response to a ChatOps command. I'll show you how to do that to get started, and it'll give you an idea of how actions work and how you can even get started. Actions is a very kind of deep area, a lot of things that you can learn, but I think by starting with that, it'll really help. So let me just let me close that and go back to my browser. Okay, so one thing I want to mention also is, so let me just mention real quick this page right here. It's called MLOps, like github.com. We have a lot of examples and things like that here. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to point this out in case it's helpful. Actually, like what I want to do next, like let's actually go into the live coding example right now. So I'm gonna do this from scratch. So I'm gonna show you how to. This is not necessarily anything to do with MLOps particularly, but it's just kind of like a hello world GitHub Actions thing that that I think is approachable for data scientists like me. And I can show you like something it might be really relevant if you're trying to design something. So I'm going to go to my GitHub. I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to create a new repo, a new repository. Let's call it Actions Demo. Okay, and I'll make it public for Actions. Add a README file. Okay, and I'll create the repository. Okay, so I have my repository, and the next thing I want to do is I want to create. So my goal is to create a GitHub action that will respond to a ChatOps command in a pull request. Okay, how do I do that? So first thing you want to do is set up a workflow file. So I'm going to add a file, create a new file. And GitHub Actions workflow files are in the .github workflows directory of a repo. And then then it's a YAML file. So I'm going to call it pr.yaml. Let's do that. Okay, so now you have to specify this YAML file that defines your action. And so when it comes to YAML files, personally, what I do is I start from like another YAML file. I don't recommend writing YAML files from scratch. That's not something I do. So what I've done on my computer is I have this, I'm using this thing called Alfred, which is this shortcut where I can have these commands. So I just had, this is just the equivalent of copying and pasting this like YAML file. So I'm going to actually delete most of this. So let me actually delete like all of it, just so we don't have to, I'll just leave that part. So we can really start from scratch and understand every single line. So an action, it first has these two lines. This just has the name of the action, so I'll just call it PR comment. And then there's this thing called on. So actions allow you to respond to arbitrary GitHub events. So you can do anything in response to anything that happens on GitHub. So anytime you label an issue, make a comment, open a PR, star an issue or star a repo, I mean, anything, almost anything you can think of, you can do something in response to that. And so the way you do that is, the way you can look that up, there's this actions documentation. And there's a lot of documentation about GitHub Actions. But if you want to see this particular thing, I usually go to this reference section. And you can see these events that trigger workflows. And there's all these events that can trigger workflows. In this case, you might think, OK, I want to trigger the workflow. So let me just do split screen between the docs and this window. So you might think, OK, I want to trigger something to happen when I comment on a pull request. And you might think, OK, I need to look at pull requests. But this actually, so this is a little bit of a gotcha. Pull requests and issues are like the same entity, equivalent entities in GitHub. So there is no pull request comment here. Even this pull request review, that's not really what I'm looking for either. So actually, what is going to help me is this thing called issue. It's going to be in issues, and particularly it will be, issue comment is what I'm looking for. That's what's going to, really trigger this event. So on here, I'll do issue comment. Okay. So the next thing you want to do is jobs. Jobs is you can run multiple jobs in parallel. So there's some boilerplate that I always use when I'm first, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't remember what to do exactly. So I want to look for this chat ops command, and how do I do that? So anytime that you trigger an event on GitHub Actions, it emits this JSON payload file. And this JSON payload has a lot of metadata about what is happening. So actually in the thing that I copied and pasted, I have this very useful bit here, which I use all the time. And so I'll just place it there, and I'll go ahead and I'll delete all this again. And so what this does is there's a special, if you look at the documentation, let me go back here. Let me actually zoom out of it a little bit. Reference. There's something called context and expression syntax. And there's all these variables that you can put in between this double bracket $ thing. And this is basically kind of like a template in between. And so there's a special thing called GitHub event. And so let's see, if I go github.event is this full event payload. And this to.json thing is just pretty prints the JSON so I can see it. But also, so that's something that's really good to look at. I'm going to call this debug. And then in addition to that, I want to do something that actually comments on the PR. And Actually, I'm going to go ahead and save this, even though this is not the valid file. That way, the GitHub thing will lint it for me. So that's the nice thing about doing this in GitHub. It'll lint this for me, let me know if I'm missing something. So I believe I have to do runs on, something like that. Oops, what am I doing wrong here? Let me just look at, my, this is where having like this thing this like boilerplate really is helpful. Oh, I have to do runs on has to be indented. Okay, so sorry. So this runs on has to be, oops, where did I get this out? Okay, that has to look like that underneath that. And then there has to be something called steps here, which tells me all the steps. So okay, you got the debug runs on steps. Okay, that looks reasonable. And I want to do the actual commenting and steps. And actually, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to put a placeholder here for now. I'm going to go ahead and delete this again. So this is pretty realistic. Even though I work in actions all day, I have by no means memorized the YAML. It's not necessarily something that I have, I can just write in my sleep. So I'm going to commit this. Okay. So this is not really doing anything. This is just telling me what the payload is. And the payload is going to help me introspect what's going on in this action. I'm going to go, so I'm going to actually open a pull request. So I'm going to add something random to the README. Xander, is this making sense so far? Any questions?
Hey, I was backstage. Yeah, totally making sense so far.
Okay.
There have been a couple comments, but I think you're still good to go.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So I'm going to open this PR, and I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to pretend like I'm trying to make a chaps command. I'm going to just call it Xander, in honor of Xander that's here with me today. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'm going to take a look at this action. And I'm going to see, okay, that's interesting. It failed on maybe it just failed when I did it initially. And so what I do is I go to this debug step. And I see the C payload. So this is that thing where I'm showing the payload. I'm printing that. And the hack is I know I'm looking for the word Xander in here. And so I see, oh, okay. So I know that this thing is in the payload and it's nested under the comment field. It's actually in the comment body, comment.body. And so that's how I can access this bit of metadata. And so that's really important. So I'm going to jump back. So, okay, comment.body. I think I can remember that. Okay. So I'm going to go here, go back to this workflow. And what I want to do now is I want to say, I only want to run this if this GitHub.event, and I can use dot notation to access the JSON. So it was under comment and body. And if I jump back here to the docs, I want to do some kind of string search to search for Xander in there. So let me see. There's a context and expression syntax, and there's all these in addition to all these variables, there's also kind of these operators, and there's also these functions. And so, okay, I want to use contains. Let's see, contains. Let me zoom in. contains. Let me just zoom in on this side too. You might not be able to see that. Okay, so contains returns true if search contains item. So I guess I want to search contains item. So I want this thing to contain Xander. So it contains, and then I'm going to say Xander. Okay. I think that makes sense. And okay, I think that should work. So let me just try that. Okay, and let me see. Let me go back to the pull request. And actually, let me make like 2 comments. I'm going to try to make a comment called Xander. Another comment that says foo. Okay. And there should be 2 kind of actions running at this point. So this one, let's see what happens. So you have the hello, it did run that. And the second action, you should skip the comment step. Hopefully. Let's see. Oh, it's still starting. Let me zoom out. Let me refresh. That's interesting. I guess it should be running anytime now. Did any of them start? I guess this one started. Okay, what about this one? Okay, so yeah, see, this check was skipped. So we know that if statement is working, essentially, like, because this is where I didn't write Xander, I wrote foo. Okay, so now I want to kind of show you how to go to the magical step of commenting on a PR. So one of my favorite, a really important concept of GitHub Actions is that you can use pre-hosted actions from other people in your workflow. So there's something really great called GitHub Script. It's one of my favorite potions. And there's so many actions that you can look for. Actually, like if you can Google search, an action that can do something. But all these actions under this, the official actions repo, are worth checking out. They offer a lot of tools. Like for data scientists, actually, like one of them that I really like that's really helpful is the Python one, where you can change, your Python version to 3.x, which is immensely helpful if trying to pip install something in an action and so on and so forth. Okay. So what I got off track here. So actions GitHub script. So what this does is it allows you to use the GitHub API to do whatever you want. So the GitHub API allows you to do things automatically on GitHub. And you can you could do basically whatever a user could do, but you could do it programmatically. And there's this really great JavaScript library called OctoKit REST. And what this is it's a JavaScript client that makes it easy to use the GitHub API. Now, if you're like me, I don't really know barely any JavaScript, and you don't really need to know any JavaScript. But this is a very useful companion to this GitHub action. And I'll show you why. So this particular kind of GitHub action has these examples. And actually, let me show you the official documentation. So the way you use, let me just make it bigger so you can actually see it, is usually when you instantiate this OctoKit stuff, you instantiate the OctoKit object, and then you have to pass your token into it. So actually, let me look at the GitHub repo. It's a little easier to see on the README, so I think you know about. Yeah, you instantiate it, and then oftentimes you have to put your token in there to authenticate yourself. And so that's a little bit cumbersome. You don't want to do that. So what this does is it makes it easy. Is you can just have this script in here. So when I find these GitHub actions, I usually have examples and I can copy and paste. So this is like commenting on an issue example. And so we're lucky in the sense that in this case, exactly what we want to do is actually on the examples. I kind of copy and paste it. But let's go through it slowly and like understand what it's doing. So this uses thing, that says, hey, there's a hosted action somewhere else. And in this case, it's on this repo called git actions/GitHub script. And you can see that is indeed the name of the repo, actions GitHub script. And this v3 at the end is just corresponding to a release. So you know how you can do these releases on GitHub. And so that it corresponds to the major version of the release. You see we're still on version 3.0 something here, so that's fine. And then these hosted actions, they can take arbitrary inputs. And so in this case, but I'm not going to get into how to make your own hosted action, but one thing that you can always see in an action that is hosted is this action.yaml file. And this kind of helps clarify like what I mean by hosted action. You can see it's kind of like an abstraction where somebody who's hosting the action can define certain inputs and outputs. And you don't have to know how all this works. You just have to provide the inputs and it will do its thing. So, so that's what I'm using here. And so we're calling this GitHub issue. GitHub is this, instead of octokit, so instead of this octokit handle, what this thing does is it provides you with this GitHub handle. And that is an authenticated like object that's ready to go that you can then call methods on, like this issues create comment thing. And you can see it like in octokit, actually. It's the same thing. You know, create comment. Let's see if I can find it here. That's a gist. Here's the issues create comment. Okay. So issues create comment. Very interestingly, when I did this, I saw a PR one. That's quite interesting. You just look at that. Create. There's a polls create comment. I didn't even know that that's here. That's really interesting. Wait, where'd it go? Polls. And just search create comment. Where'd it go? Try searching for it again. Polls. Oh, create comment. Sometimes the search in this doesn't work the way I want it to. Let's just see. Polls create comment. Okay, I guess that, let me just go to this page. And it's in polls. Okay, maybe I can find it in here. Create a review comment, no. Poll comment. I don't, okay. Maybe the docs, I can't find it right now in the docs, but let's just see if I can do the issue one, create comment. Let's see, create issues, create comment. Okay, let's see, this takes me to the right place. Okay, that takes me to the right place. So you see, like, this is the interface, where if I have an authenticated octokit already, then I create issues, create comment, and I have the owner, repo, issue, and body. And you know, they're all required. And so issue number is the same thing as a PR number, if you're wondering. You're like, I want to comment on a PR. This is an issue. But actually, issues and PRs are the same kind of thing in GitHub, as I mentioned earlier. So, okay, you have this create comment and you have these inputs. Now you're wondering, what is this context thing? And actually, I wondered what the context thing was too. Like, I did not know. So what I did is, so the equivalent of print in JavaScript is console.log. So I just did context here. And you can see what it does. Okay, so this should like print this thing here. Thanks for reporting. So let's see what it does. Let me comment on PR with Xander, with that Xander chat ops thing, and let's see what happens. So Xander, here we go. Okay, there's Xander. Let's see if it works, or let's see what it prints out. Okay, so here we go. What's going on here? So we have this. So okay, this is the context. Really large JSON thing. You can see it contains all kinds of metadata. Also, whatever this context thing is, and it's something that this GitHub action provides inside the place where you can write scripts. So that's really cool. Like you can just easily access this if you want. And so that's what this action is referencing when it's doing whatever it's doing. Now let's see if it worked. Bet you it did. See, there you go. Thanks for reporting. So okay, this is like a hey, hello world example, but you can kind of see now, you can kind of get a mental picture of how that machine learning example that I showed earlier, like how you can start to think about how to make that work in your workflows. So there's all kinds of really cool examples of this. Not just one I showed. So if you go back to this MLOps GitHub page, there's actually a bunch of GitHub actions that are like this. So I mentioned weights and biases, for example. So we have a GitHub action that will help you pull metrics from weights and biases. And this is kind of how it looks. These are the inputs and outputs, or these are the inputs you might have. So, so this now hopefully looks a little bit familiar, this like a workflow example. And you can see, okay, this is something where you would pass some inputs, and you can get your inputs from other steps, which I didn't go into. It can, there's a lot of things to talk about GitHub Actions. I don't want to do a GitHub Actions full tutorial. I think that would take maybe 10 sessions to do. But I just want to give you an idea of how to get started. So, you can, there's a weights and biases action helping you pull like experiment runs into a PR. There's this really cool one that we just created with great expectations. And so this is actually a good GIF. I don't really have to do a lot of demo on this one, but you can check your data pipeline. So this is a SQL query, and you can verify that your data is correct on your own infrastructure. So this is a case where it failed, a data validation failed in a data pipeline. And this is verifying, some, like this example, the distribution of what the data is and what was how it's materialized by the query is different. I don't want to go too much detail about this particular action. I just want to say, like, there's a whole portfolio of different actions that we have built at GitHub that can help with this. And there's something that can help you with Kubeflow pipelines, something that can help you with Argo, which is what I showed in that earlier demo. And there's also like talks and blog posts and things to dig in. So it's actually a very rich area. I found it really helpful as far as putting things in my workflow. And so, yeah, I think it's really cool. So you might be thinking, like, there's a large distance between this hello world example that I showed and all that complicated machine learning stuff. But actually, like, there's a lot of things in the middle. They're pretty straightforward. And let me show you one example. So if you're a machine learning person, you might something like Binder Hub. And let me see. Oh, this documentation has changed. Let's see if I can find it. Maybe it's my binder. My binder docs. Let's try that. Yeah, I think this is it, right? Okay. Yeah, here we go. So, okay. So if you, I don't know, so you might be familiar with this binder button. And so this is actually really similar to what I showed before. Like, what if you want to put a binder badge on a PR? So that's actually really easy to do. You could do that and almost just by adding just a little bit extra to what I showed with live coding. So this is like the entire workflow file right here with if you to place a binder badge on a pull request. This is the entire workflow file. It really looks the same. You're using that GitHub script thing, and we are creating a comment. But instead of just like a canned comment, we're actually putting the badge, the markdown of the badge, and we are grabbing the metadata about the PR, which is in this, grabbing it from the JSON payload, and we're putting it in the link in the right places, so the badge points to the right branch where the PR is being opened. So this is just giving an example. There's a lot of things you can do. Okay, I'll stop the live demo there, and I can take questions if there's any. I hope that's useful. One thing I want to mention is self-hosted runners. So you might be wondering, hey, like this is great, you have actions, but what if my data is behind, like on my private infrastructure, on my own bare metal? Maybe you're not using the cloud, maybe you're using a VPC, and that's totally fine. You can have your data center talk to your actions runners. So something called self-hosted actions, self-hosted runners, rather. And self-hosted runners allow you to run the GitHub runner, the thing that runs actions in your own private infrastructure. And what it does is it pulls GitHub, and it constantly asks GitHub, hey, is there any new workflows being requested? And so as long as your private infrastructure has access to the internet, you can host your own private runners, and those can then have access to your private data. And so that's what we use a lot of times for things, that involve private data, which is usually the case in companies. So that's good. That's good for pointing that out. So one question is, do you find the team adapts well to these new workflows? Yeah, I think so. I found that teams adapt to this new workflow because it really fits with the software engineering paradigm. Like, in addition to the unit tests that you have already, you just get more information, potentially, or more things that help you. So it's not really something very new. It's meant to fit. It's meant to augment your software engineering workflow with additional tools that help you if you're doing machine learning or data science. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I think that's a wrap.